Current and former residents of an HOA, what's your I'll never live in HOA again story? My old house's backyard bordered the HOA community. Our house was built 30 years before the community was built, so we weren't part of it. We used to get notices about violations and fines if we didn't correct them. Never did correct them. They finally sent legal papers to repossess our house. Went to court with a tax map that showed our property not part of the HOA community. Judge dismissed their suit against us and found them guilty of harassment. We didn't get awarded much, but I made sure to break every rule of theirs I could until we moved. This makes me happy that someone could actually stick it to an HOA. I usually like living in HOAs, and the ones I've lived in have been decent, but my parents' HOA is insane. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer and began his chemo, he became too weak to walk. My parents installed a ramp at the front door so he could get his wheelchair into the house. Their neighbor, the HOA president, went crazy. She demanded doctor's notes, appointment slips, and that my dad proved to the neighborhood that he could walk and was lying. My dad was too weak to do anything and mom is too passive, so I had to step in. I threatened to lawyer up and sue her personally. She eventually backed down. My dad passed away in April, and a week after, she came banging at our door saying she saw the funeral home come and pick my dad up and that we need to take the ramp down now that he's finally dead. Her exact words. At that point, I called the police right in front of her to report her for stalking and harassment. I moved in with my mom, and now every time this woman sees me, she runs back into her house. On another note, she follows neighborhood kids home from school asking their names and where they live because she wants to know if they really live there, and my neighbors and I have caught her many a time looking into our backyards. If she's following kids anywhere, call the police immediately. I live in Florida and have the pleasure of living in a HOA neighborhood while not being a part of the HOA. Apparently there are a total of 3 houses in my neighborhood not part of the HOA, and I was fortunate enough to have bought one of them. Every previous owner refused to sign into the HOA, and I have continued this tradition. Best part is getting all sorts of fines, letters, and people knocking on my door informing me of stupid trivial violation. I just get to laugh at them while I explain I'm not a member of their stupid little club and therefore not beholden to its rules. At one point they had my truck towed out of my driveway because of the HOA's no truck policy. I simply called the cops and reported it stolen. It was found at a local impound lot and returned to me free of charge. The HOA ended up having to pay for the tow impound fees and tried on several occasions to pass those on to me through fines. Finally had a lawyer write up a cease and desist letter telling them to leave me alone or I'll press charges for the theft of my truck and harassment. That was 6 months ago, and I think they finally figured out they have no authority to tell me squat because I haven't heard from them since. We had a house fire that cost 2 children lives. 2 days after the fire we got notices that we need to do something about the debris because it was unsightly and we were a corner lot. I hope somebody got at least a black eye for that. There were 366 units spread out on over 200 plus acres of land. One of the residents got fined $1,250 for putting outdoor Christmas lights on 2 trees in front of their unit. Outdoor decorations being prohibited beyond residents' front door entryway. I honestly don't understand how some organizations can justify these kinds of rules. I love reading contracts and agreements, so when a friend of mine told me about his HOA troubles and not letting him keep his boat behind his house, I jumped on the opportunity. After reading, sourcing and finding a few rulings, I learned that they have very little power to enforce what they can't see from the road, which affects property value. He took my documentation to the HOA and requested that they remove his fines. They refused, saying the agreement says nag, and after a few months he finally paid a real estate lawyer $2,000 to go talk circles around the HOA, and they finally backed down, removed his fines and allowed him to keep his boat. Then out of pure spite and with my design, we built a 40 feet tall temporary structure, conforming to both the HOA agreement and building code, to fly a flag on a further 25 feet pole. We took it down and put it back up every 3 months for a year. You could see it from almost anywhere in the neighborhood. It was a real triumph and it was hideous. I was putting on new siding, very obviously too, had ladders up and everything, but there was just plywood up one morning on part of my house. facing the street. I got a knock on the door at 7:30 am. A code enforcement officer, in uniform, looking vaguely like a cop, was visibly upset and acting like I'd taken a dump on the front sidewalk or something. Told me if I didn't have the siding up by the end of the day I'd start getting fined every day. HOA lost paperwork for change of ownership when we bought our house. They sent us letters saying there would be a lien placed on our home if we didn't pay the overdue amounts plus over $200 of late fees. I had to call them 3 times to even get someone on the phone who knew how to help me. Then I contacted escrow who said they had already not only sent all the paperwork, but turns out we had already paid the fees. Called HOA again and they were insistent that we hadn't paid or sent over paperwork. Called escrow again and requested they contact the HOA themselves to sort this out and HOA still insisted we owed a late fee. Started losing my crap until escrow said they would pay the late fee. A month later we got a letter in the mail saying we were being fined for leaving our trash bins out longer than necessary. Frick HOA. God, I hate HOA. There should not be a reason that you could lose your house for not doing some arbitrary thing on your own dang property. My wife's aunt and uncle live in a HOA neighborhood. Their current problem is that the ground is higher than their first level and it's sloped towards a group of condos. Every time it rains bad, their condos flood. They don't have basements. HOA won't do anything and it seems a few of their residents are lawyering up. This has happened since they put in a storm drain and for some reason it backs up into their common area which is behind the group of condos. I'm being charged $400 because of a violation for a bush overhanging my walkway. I don't have a walkway or a bush. The picture isn't even my house. They won't back down. My family was fined for putting up a fence when we put a 12-inch tall wire border around our flower bed. My friend was fined in a different HOA because her garage, that was painted by the same company at the same time and with the same paint, was a different color than her house. It wasn't. The HOA president delivered the violation notice to her on the day of her husband's funeral. Yes, he knew that she, 46-year-old, had just lost her, 48-year-old, husband 4 days before. Okay, I officially have to quit reading this thread now. This made me just rage for your friend. I hope she smacked him in the nose. My grandparents lived in an old folks community with a zealous HOA. My grandmother had to go to the hospital, cause of her mental health problems. My grandfather would go with her. This happened once when I was visiting. There was a knock on the door at about 10 am. 2 elderly women with clipboards immediately jump into a speech about how the trash cans hadn't been brought in. I explained the situation. One of them said she was in the hospital the previous week but still managed to bring in her trash can and handed me what looked like a ticket for $50. Frick, that crap. My daughter was a lifeguard at the pool in our community and they weren't allowed to give out certain equipment. It was for swimming lessons. One day the HOA president asks for equipment and my daughter says no as she was instructed. The HOA president actually says, "Do you know who I am?" Then he proceeded to call her boss. When I was a kid my parents had a house in a nice cul-de-sac, but it was a working class neighborhood. The transmission in my truck took a doo-doo so I replaced it in our driveway. A few days later we got a letter citing a clause stating all improvements done on property must be done by a licensed contractor. It was a far reach but they stood by it as there was nothing in the CC&Rs against working on personal vehicles. My dad made me pay him back for the fine but for a while afterwards I'd go put some oil or coolant under the HOA president's cars and hope he wasting money chasing a non-existent problem. That is brilliant revenge. I was just learning to drive and parked my car too far away from the curb. Parents and neighbors didn't get along so neighbors measured the distance from the wheels to the curb and parents got fined. Now I live in the country with pretty much no rules. We have goats and emus in our front yard. HOA lost my quarterly check. Sent a notice that I didn't pay an October quarter. Showed them the receipt from when I dropped it off. Then started naming each quarter before until I didn't have receipt proof they received it and then it was that is the one you didn't pay. Tried to charge an extra $5 for something. Sold the house and moved far away. Your cashed check is proof. Moved to Florida where every neighborhood is a HOA. Upon moving in, I felt like I had joined a sorority or fraternity and I had to endure the hazing from the HOA. The final straw was when they sent me a letter that my white mailbox was dirty. So I decided to walk down one street and took pics of mailboxes with no doors and mailboxes that were covered in mildew, and I emailed them all to the HOA. I told them to not send me any more notices until these mailboxes were up to code. I haven't received another notice in a year. I guess I passed my initiation. They'll bully you around until you hit them with a taste of reality and that you won't tolerate their bulls anymore. So, when I was a kid, my mom moved to a townhouse complex, which had a strata council, which was basically a HOA. I often keep late hours, so I like to keep my windows blacked out so I can sleep in. So, I tinfoiled my windows, which were recessed basement windows. You could not see these windows without being on our property. She got a notice to remove them, because no window coverings are allowed unless they are white or beige. She passes this along to me. So, I take the tin foil down, put white paper over the windows, and then tin foil behind that. And to further improve things, I then add a layer of black construction paper. No light is getting through, and it's all white from the outside, which is allowed. They then drop off a note asking what time they can come by to inspect to make sure there's no tin foil on the inside of the window. My mom and I had a good laugh over this, and ignored the letter. They sent a follow-up, more demanding, angry letter. We ignored that too. Eventually they sent one threatening fines, and my mom sent one back that lied and said they had already inspected, and they needed to figure their crap out. And then she got an apology and no further hassling on this issue, because the strata council was full of busybodies who hated each other, and no one wanted to admit that they were out of the loop. This didn't happen to me, but several years ago a co-worker told me about how she and her husband put in a small in-ground pool in their backyard. They got all of the required permits and everything, and nobody said boo during the weeks of construction. After the pool was installed and they were getting ready to open it, the HOA sent them a letter informing them that it was in violation of the HOA rules and it had to be removed. I guess their community had a public pool at the clubhouse or something. They ended up going to court and spending thousands of dollars to fight it. In the end, they agreed to erect a high privacy fence around it so that it wouldn't be visible. How ridiculous. I've never lived in one, but I remember a story where a guy wanted to build something like an 8 featuring privacy fence. The HOA said the fence couldn't be higher than 5 featuring. The wording only said fence, so he built a 5-foot concrete partition and stuck a 5-foot fence on top of it. Malicious compliance is my favorite when it comes to HOAs. This sort of fits. I lived with my wife in officer housing on a military installation. Of course we had to follow certain rules so everything looked shipshape. That wasn't hard to do. What did get under my skin was the colonel driving around, taking notes, and then having her underlings issue tickets to residents for minor infractions. The one that sticks in my mind was the suckers, as they were called. I had never heard the term before. Although I kept my grass mowed per regulation, the little maple tree seeds would sprout up overnight and be an inch taller than the grass. I got a ticket for suckers in my lawn, even though the grass was freshly mowed. Okay, sure, I'll just mow the lawn every goddamn day. Sheesh. I never lived under an HOA, but that experience was enough for me to realize HOAs weren't my thing. They wanted me to switch the color of the light bulbs I used outside. Nah, I don't need someone who is that picky to have any power over my property. At that point, it's no better than renting. My former condo HOA threatened to take me to court over the color of a light bulb inside my condo. They said I'd altered the exterior appearance of the building since it could be seen through the window. My HOA president walks around the neighborhood every day and takes pictures of any violations he finds. There is a management company that does monthly checks for violations, but that's not enough for this old, bored, retired man. About a month after having a baby, I got a knock on the door from the HOA president, which I answer in my post-surgical breastfeeding outfit, because a palm frond hadn't been trimmed after being down for 3 days. Then I got a written notice the next day. Then I got another notice 2 days later. The HOA maintains the roads and there's a 15 mph speed limit. People drive pretty slow. These idiots put in 3 speed bumps on a 200-foot stretch of road. I've never seen anyone blast through and I regularly go on walks. They also put up a security camera, raising our monthly dues, because one neighbor left their garage door open all day and someone took a few things. We clearly live in a dangerous area full of criminals. I can't sell yet, but when I do, never living in a HOA again. We rented a condo from the people who owned it and it was associated with a HOA. We like to grow things but there was no balcony so we just had 2 large pots, one on either side of our door. We got a notice one day that we had to get rid of our only plants because they didn't fit the aesthetic of the building, or something. Basically, they were too ugly. They also didn't have a room to discuss whatever it is they discuss at meetings, so they would do it in the gym for some reason. They'd move all of the equipment to the side and set up their tables and chairs and then never moved anything back. One time I accidentally barged in on them in my workout gear and I actually had the nerve to ask them if there was a boardroom I could work out in. I said it on my way out, so I don't know what their response was, but yeah, we didn't renew our lease there. Just go exercise in one of their home offices or their bedroom. I live in a neighborhood that has a $1 a month HOA because we have a shared drive with an area drain. That money goes to emptying the area drain every couple of years. The CC&Rs are very laid back, there are no rules, so I, wrongfully, assumed that would be the experience living here. The HOA president, the guy who schedules the area drains being emptied, is a boomer on a power trip. He is in my business about everything. I got a new furnace and he threatened to sue me because the utility company had to use the driveway. I scheduled a specialty garbage pickup with my garbage company and he called me screaming that I put garbage out in front of my house that morning. I have a retaining wall in front of my house and he came by and yelled at me for cleaning it. The list goes on and on. Total nightmare experience and I will never live somewhere with a HOA of any kind ever again. Had a member of the board drive up and yell at me while I was moving in because a moving van was in the street. Parked it in the driveway but it stuck out into the street about 2 feet. Woke up the next morning and there was a warning posted on the moving van for sticking out into the street. Welcome to the neighborhood. Ended up living next door to the biggest butthole in the neighborhood too. These were 0 lot line properties and he put an above ground pool in the side yard between our 2 houses. There's supposed to be 3 feet space along the side of the house for access but his pool went from his wall to my wall so you couldn't even walk between the properties. Then every time they went swimming the pool walls would flex and bang my house. I wrote multiple letters to the HOA but they didn't do anything. Moved out shortly after the pool incident. I'll never live in another HOA. Should have called city code enforcement. Alternatively, cut the pool down your property line because he gifted it to you by leaving it there and you can't allow establishing adverse possession. My former HOA threatened to take me to court over the color of a light bulb inside of my condo. They claimed that the color of a bulb inside my unit altered the exterior appearance of the building. I'd had Philips Hue lights for probably over a year without issue. Then my neighbor left up their Christmas lights well past New Year's and received a complaint about it. Next thing I knew, someone complained about my Hue lights. I switched them to white. I could have won in court, but it wasn't worth angering a bunch of petty buttholes who have nothing better to do than to sit on a HOA board. Anyway, the association wanted to add a new amendment that allowed them to sue anyone over anything they deemed a nuisance. They brought in their lawyer for a question and answer session. I asked if the color of my neighbor's lights could be considered a nuisance. He clarified that it had to be a bigger concern. I followed up asking if we could claim that my neighbor had altered the exterior appearance of the building. He laughed and said no dismissively. So by that point their lawyer had already admitted their case was unwinnable, and he'd said earlier in the meeting a big part of his job was to keep the association from taking an unwinnable case to court. So the lights were whatever color I wanted them to be from then on. I now live in a neighborhood without a HOA. Sometimes a neighbor's grass is a bit high and another neighbor just built a patio in the front yard, and sometimes people put trash out a couple days before the city says they can and nobody says anything. It's wonderful. I'd just run them in fast rainbow RGB and remove all my curtains if that happened. I was doing some work in the yard and had a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket on my driveway. After about an hour I took the bucket back in the garage and went inside. A week later my HOA sent me a 3-page letter with a picture of said bucket on my driveway saying it detracted from the value of my neighbor's homes. It was on my driveway for an hour while I was working. Can't make this up, folks. We had a cookie cutter house built. One of the color palettes we could choose from included an accent color for the door shutters that was a dark purple. The hubs and I are a little kooky, so we selected it. At our final walkthrough, our door and shutters are brown. I tell the general that it's wrong and show him my contract. We were the only homeowners in the subdivision that selected that color, so the HOA decided to not offer it anymore. We said fine, that puts you in breach of contract and we want to be released. A few phone calls later, my door and shutters are purple and I'm happy. We purchased the house. At least once a year we got a nasty letter from the HOA about our unapproved door color. Every time I sent them a copy of my contract and their bylaws stating that the colors from the builder are allowed. Not my problem, you guys discontinued it after I picked it. It's just incredible to me that in this world there exist people who look at the colors of doors of other people's homes and keep a mental list of which colors are allowed and which are not, and are willing and able to levy fines against someone for having the wrong color of door. A week after moving in, I received a letter from mine saying I was spotted not cleaning up after my dog in the common area. That was a blatant lie. Every single time he pooped there it was picked up. I didn't have roommates at the time, so there was no way it could have been someone else. The fine would be $100 fine after the first warning and $150 after that. I wrote back telling them I didn't appreciate being lied to and accused, and that was not a way to welcome me to the neighborhood. I went on to inform them that if it happens again and they provide no evidence to back their claims, they will be hearing from my lawyer for harassment. They would do that to everyone that moved in with a dog. They constantly made up special rules about parking depending on who it was for. Us couldn't park on the road at all. Others could. Brought that up to them and then called the president anytime I saw a car parked. He didn't like the constant calls. I started parking on the street, and when he said something, I told him to frick off and have the same rules for everyone or stfu. He stfu about it. They would complain about the backyard. That could only be seen if you purposely went out of your way to look. They said they had to keep the community looking beautiful. I asked why there's always trash not picked up and little liquor bottles everywhere. Why weren't they picked up on his beauty walks? No answer. I made it a point to pick out every little thing in his yard and called him to report him. He didn't like that. Told him to stop harassing me or I'm getting my lawyer because he is singling out this house and it's going to end now, or he's going to be paying for the consequences. My HOA had a coup where half the board resigned on the spot. Same day, and the 3 board members that were left handed management of our neighborhood over to some mega HOA corporation based out of LA. Before the handoff was complete, the chairman of the board fired everyone that worked for the HOA, including our incredibly talented accountant who, due to his experience, kept our finances so tip-top that we had a surplus of money and have never had our monthly dues raised in almost 15 years. When we, the residents, demanded an explanation, the chairman refused by quoting an article from our HOA charter which gives the board the explicit right to manage the community however they see fit and without needed approval from the residents. He basically told us, I don't owe any of you an explanation, so suck it. Now we are trying to overturn his decision to essentially give our neighborhood over to some crappy HOA management group that treats its residents horribly like a crappy landlord would a tenant. Oh, and the management group that we were given to is run by a man whose only formal education is a degree in opera, and the accountant who has been assigned to manage my neighborhood's finances does not have a degree in finance or business. She has a degree in ballet. It is my opinion that our board was bribed into selling us to that management firm. Our community hired a lawyer and we are in the process of reversing what our board has done. If successful, we are going to rehire everyone they terminated and change the bylaws to prevent anyone from ever being able to do this again. So yeah, that's my worst story and it's still going on right now. So she can dance around the issues you bring up while he sings the praises of how great a job the HOA is doing. Sounds good to me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.